November 12, 1944. RAF Woodbridge, England. Visibility 100 feet. A B-17 Flying Fortress, tail number 42-31407, emerged from the fog bank like a ghost. Its hydraulics were gone, landing gear stuck halfway, number 4 engine dead. And inside the cockpit, First Lieutenant Thomas Crawford faced a choice that defied every rule he'd learned in flight school. Land backwards, or watch 8 men die. The control tower erupted. "Crawford! Negative! Abort! Abort!" Crawford's voice came back flat, calm, inevitable. "Tower, I'm out of options. Wheels won't lock. I'm coming in tail first." Silence. Then, "Crawford, you're insane! You'll cartwheel!" "Maybe, but my crew walks away, preparing for reverse approach." What happened in the next 4 minutes rewrote emergency landing procedures for every Allied Air Force. And it started with the most dangerous decision a pilot could make: to ignore every instinct, every manual, every regulation, and fly backwards into the fog. This is the story of how laughter turned to silence, how 8 condemned men lived, and how one pilot's impossible maneuver became legend. Thomas Crawford grew up in Montana, where winter fog rolled through valleys like ocean waves. His father flew crop dusters, the kind of flying where you stayed low, read the terrain by feel, and trusted your gut more than instruments. Crawford inherited that instinct. By 22, he'd logged 800 hours. By 24, he was piloting B-17s over Germany. His crew called him Backwards Tom, not because of flying, because of poker. Crawford bet reverse odds, folded strong hands, raised weak ones. He read opponents by what they didn't do. His co-pilot, Second Lieutenant Mike Jennings, once asked him why. Crawford's answer became crew legend. In poker and flying, everyone expects you to play forward, but sometimes the winning move is the one nobody sees coming. November 12th started normal. Pre-dawn briefing.
Target: Merseburg oil refineries deep in Germany. 824 B-17s, 3,000 fighters escorting. Crawford's crew, 9 men, had flown 27 missions together, 3 more to rotation home. They were careful now, the kind of careful that keeps you alive when statistics say you're already dead. Takeoff, 05:47 hours. Formation assembly over the North Sea. Crawford's fortress, christened Rocky Mountain High, slotted into the High Squadron. Everything by the book. Jennings handled the radios. Navigator Lieutenant Dan Morrison plotted waypoints. Engineer Sergeant Frank Delgado monitored fuel flow. Ball turret gunner Sergeant Eddie Kowalski wedged into his glass bubble beneath the aircraft. Waist gunners Sergeants Tommy Liu and Carl Henderson manned the side windows. Tail gunner Sergeant Marcus Washington crouched in the rear compartment. Radio operator Sergeant Bill O'Malley tracked frequencies. Bombardier Lieutenant James Sterling prepared the Norden bomb site. 8 men, plus Crawford. They trusted him because he never panicked. Not when flak burst close. Not when fighters dove through formations. Crawford flew smooth, deliberate, like he was reading a book only he could see. The formation crossed into Germany at 14,000 feet. Cloud cover solid below. Intelligence said light resistance. Intelligence was wrong. At 08:47 hours, 50 miles from target, the sky erupted. Messerschmitt Bf-109s dove through the bomber stream in coordinated waves. Cannon fire stitched across formations. B-17s fell burning. Crawford's squadron took the first hit at 08:51. The bomber ahead exploded mid-air, debris spinning into the slipstream. Crawford banked hard right, avoiding wreckage by 30 feet. Then the flak started. Black puffs bloomed across the sky like poisonous flowers. The bomber shuddered. Metal screamed. Kowalski in the ball turret called out, "German fighters at 6 o'clock." Washington in the tail opened fire, his twin 50s hammering. Tracer rounds arced through the formation. A Focke-Wulf 190 rolled inverted and dove straight at them. Liu fired from the waist gun, walking rounds across the fighter's wing route. The Focke-Wulf exploded, tumbling earthward, trailing fire.
but 2 more came behind it. Crawford pushed the yoke forward, dropping 500 feet in 3 seconds. The maneuver threw the crew against their restraints, but spoiled the German attack geometry. The fighters overshot, climbing away to reposition. "Good flying, Skipper," Jennings said quietly. Crawford didn't answer. His eyes tracked the formation ahead, counting aircraft. They'd lost 4 bombers in 2 minutes. The mission was falling apart. At 09:12 hours, they reached the initial point, the turn toward the bomb run. Morrison called out headings. Sterling activated the bomb sight. The bomber steadied on course. Crawford's hands light on the controls. In bombing formation, pilots flew straight and level. No evasion. The bombardier owned the aircraft. The flak intensified. Shells burst at exact altitude, shrapnel ripping through aluminum skin. The noise was deafening, a continuous thunder that drowned out engine roar. Crawford felt impacts through the airframe. Small hits, manageable. Then a shell detonated directly beneath them. The fortress lurched upward, thrown by the blast. Shrapnel tore through the bomb bay, severing hydraulic lines. Red fluid sprayed across the catwalk. Delgado saw it first. "Hydraulics failing! Pressure dropping fast!" Crawford checked his gauges. Hydraulic pressure? 0. That meant no brakes, no landing gear extension, no flaps. The gear might drop from gravity alone, but it wouldn't lock. And without locked gear, landing meant cartwheeling down the runway at 120 knots. "Bombs away!" Sterling's voice cut through the chaos. The fortress rose as 4,000 pounds of ordnance fell toward the refinery below. Crawford banked left, rejoining the formation. But the hits kept coming. At 09:24, number 4 engine took a direct flak strike. The engine disintegrated in a cloud of metal fragments and burning oil. Crawford feathered the propeller, stopping its rotation. 3 engines now. Still flyable. Barely. At 09:31, over the German border, a burst of cannon fire from a pursuing Bf-109 walked across the right wing. Fuel sprayed from punctured tanks. O'Malley transferred fuel to the left side tanks, trying to balance the load. But they were hemorrhaging aviation gasoline at 20 gallons per minute. Jennings did the math. "Skipper, we won't make England." Crawford already knew. The question was where to ditch. Open water? Occupied territory? Or risk the final approach to an English emergency field with no hydraulics, minimal fuel, and fog so thick you couldn't see the ground? At 10:47 hours, they crossed the channel. England ahead. But visibility had collapsed. Fog rolled across the coast in dense gray walls. Crawford descended through clouds, instruments only. At 5,000 feet, they broke into clear air. For exactly 12 seconds. Then fog swallowed them again. "Woodbridge Tower, this is Rocky Mountain High, declaring emergency. Hydraulics gone, landing gear unstable, visibility 0. Request immediate clearance." The tower controller's voice came back tense. "Rocky Mountain? Divert to Manston. Better visibility there." "Negative tower. Fuel critical. 1 approach only. Request foam on runway." "Copy that. Foam trucks deploying. Wind is calm. Visibility 100 feet. You're cleared for emergency approach runway 27. Crawford descended to 800 feet. Nothing but gray fog. No horizon. No ground reference. Just instruments and instinct. At 400 feet, Jennings spotted the runway lights. Dim orange glows barely visible through the murk. Crawford adjusted course. Then the landing gear warning horn blared. The main wheels had dropped from gravity, but the indicator lights showed red. Unsafe. Not locked. "Gears down, but not locked," Delgado confirmed. "It'll collapse on touchdown." Crawford's mind ran through options. Belly landing? Possible, but the bomber would slide a quarter mile, likely cartwheeling. Bailout? In this fog, half the crew would never find the ground in time. Try landing on the unlocked gear? The wheels would fold, sending them cartwheeling at 100 knots. Then he remembered Montana. Winter fog. His father's crop duster. The impossible maneuver he'd watched as a boy. Tower, I'm going to try something. Go ahead, Rocky Mountain. Crawford's voice stayed flat, emotionless, like he was ordering coffee. I'm reversing approach, coming in tail first. Silence. Then, say again, Rocky Mountain. Tail first approach. I'll fly backwards, touch down on the tail wheel first, let the nose settle. Main gear hits last, minimal impact, less chance of collapse. Crawford, that's insane. You'll cartwheel. Maybe, but it's our only shot. He didn't wait for approval. At 200 feet, Crawford pulled power, slowing to 90 knots. The bomber wallowed, mushy on the controls. He nudged the rudder, sliding the aircraft sideways. The tail swung around. Now they flew at an angle, nose pointing 30 degrees off course, tail leading. Everybody brace! Crawford's voice cut through the intercom. We're landing backwards. The crew didn't question it. They'd followed Crawford through hell 27 times. If he said fly backwards, they'd fly backwards. Washington in the tail turret had the best view. Skipper, I can see the approach lights. We're drifting left. Crawford corrected with rudder. The bomber slid sideways through the fog, tail pointed toward the runway, nose angled into clean air. It violated every principle of aerodynamics, but Crawford wasn't flying aerodynamics anymore. He was flying physics. At 100 feet, the tail wheel touched foam. The contact was gentle, barely a bump. Crawford held the yoke neutral, letting gravity do the work. The fuselage settled tail first onto the runway, skidding through foam like a sled on snow. The friction slowed them. 30 knots, 20 knots. The nose dropped, the main wheels hit, and held. The gear didn't collapse. It flexed, groaned, but held. The bomber rolled forward another 200 feet before stopping. Silence. Just engine idle and the hiss of foam settling. Jennings stared at Crawford. You just landed a B-17 backwards. Crawford killed the engines. Yeah, let's not do that again. The tower controller's voice came through shaking. Rocky Mountain High, you are down. Emergency crews on the way. That was... I don't even have words for that. Crawford unstrapped. His hands were steady. Always steady. Tower, we're shutting down. Crews walking out. And they did. All 9 men. Crawford first, then Jennings, then the rest. They stood in the fog, staring at the bomber sitting tail first on the runway, nose pointing skyward at a 20-degree angle. The main gear had bent, but not broken. Foam covered everything. Delgado laughed. It started as a chuckle, then became something uncontrollable. Lou joined in, then Henderson. Soon the entire crew stood laughing in the fog, alive when they should have been dead. The emergency crews arrived. Fire trucks, ambulances, a crowd of ground personnel. They stared at the bomber, at the skid marks in the foam, at Crawford standing calm and quiet like he'd just parked a car. The base commander, Colonel Richard Hayes, pushed through the crowd. He looked at the bomber, at Crawford, back at the bomber. Lieutenant, did you just land tail first? Yes, sir. That's impossible. Apparently not, sir. Hayes studied him, then smiled. You just rewrote the manual, Crawford. I don't know whether to court-martial you or give you a medal. Crawford's face stayed blank. I'll take the medal, sir. The laughter started again, but this time it wasn't the crew. It was everyone. Ground crew, fire teams, medics. They'd all heard the radio traffic. They'd all expected to find wreckage and bodies. Instead, they found a bomber sitting backwards on a runway and 9 men walking away. That night in the barracks, word spread. Crawford had done the impossible, flown backwards, landed tail first, saved 8 lives with a maneuver no one thought could work. The crew that had called him Backwards Tom for his poker strategy now used the name for something else. The pilot who bet on reverse odds, and won. But the story didn't end there, because what Crawford did that day in the fog changed how pilots thought about emergencies. It challenged the assumption that there was only one way to land an aircraft. And in the months that followed, 3 more pilots successfully used the technique to save their crews when hydraulics failed. The maneuver got a name, the Crawford reversal. It was added to emergency procedure manuals, taught at training schools, studied by engineers trying to understand how it worked. And every time an instructor taught it, they started the same way. They laughed at him, said he was insane, but sometimes the impossible is just the solution nobody thought to try. Crawford finished his tour, 30 missions, then rotated home to Montana. He never flew combat again, but his legacy lived on in every pilot who learned the Crawford reversal, in every crew that walked away from a crippled aircraft, in the understanding that innovation doesn't come from following rules. It comes from knowing when to break them. November 12, 1944, the day a pilot flew backwards into history and proved that sometimes the winning move is the one nobody sees coming.
The photographs appeared in Stars and Stripes 3 days later. Crawford standing beside his backwards parked bomber, the crew grinning like they'd gotten away with murder. The headline read, "Pilot lands tail first, saves 9." But the photo that mattered most never made the papers. It was taken by an engineering officer who arrived at Woodbridge that afternoon to examine the wreckage. Except there was no wreckage, just a bomber sitting at an impossible angle with foam-covered gear that should have collapsed, but didn't. Captain Henry Morrison from Wright Field's engineering division measured everything. The skid marks in the foam, the angle of approach, the stress fractures in the landing gear struts. He interviewed Crawford for 3 hours. Then he did something unusual. He recommended the maneuver be studied, tested, and potentially added to emergency procedures. The suggestion caused an uproar at 8th Air Force headquarters. Generals don't like pilots inventing procedures. It creates chaos, it undermines authority, and it opens questions about why standard procedures failed in the first place. But Morrison's report was thorough. He'd calculated the physics. When a B-17 landed normally on damaged gear, the main wheels hit first, carrying the full weight of the aircraft at 120 knots. The impact force exceeded structural limits. Gear collapsed. Aircraft cartwheeled. But Crawford's reversal distributed impact differently. The tail wheel touched first, carrying minimal weight. As the bomber settled tail to nose, friction slowed forward momentum. By the time main gear touched, speed had dropped to 60 knots. Impact force reduced by half. Gear held. Simple physics, brilliantly applied. Morrison sent his findings to every bomber group in the European theater. Most commanders ignored it. Too unconventional, too risky. But 3 groups, the 91st, 305th, and 381st, added it to informal training. Pilots practiced the maneuver at high altitude, simulated approaches, learned the feel. December 23, 1944, 6 weeks after Crawford's landing, a B-17 from the 91st Bomb Group lost hydraulics over Belgium. Pilot, First Lieutenant David Chen. He'd read Morrison's report, practiced the maneuver twice at 15,000 feet. Now he faced the same choice Crawford had: bail out over enemy territory, or try the impossible. Chen tried. He landed tail first at RAF Bassingbourn. 8 men walked away. The technique worked. January 17, 1945. Another B-17. Another hydraulic failure. This time over France. Lieutenant Marcus Reed remembered Crawford's name from the reports. He reversed approach at RAF Molesworth. 10 men survived. February 8, 1945. Lieutenant Thomas Yamaguchi. Same scenario, same result. 9 men alive. 3 successful attempts in 3 months. The maneuver wasn't luck. It was replicable, teachable, life-saving. In March 1945, the Army Air Forces officially designated it Emergency Landing Procedure 7B, tail-first approach for hydraulic failure scenarios. The manual included Crawford's photograph, Morrison's calculations, and step-by-step instructions. Pilots called it the Crawford reversal. Engineers called it distributed impact landing. But everyone agreed on one thing: it worked. Crawford himself never flew another combat mission after November 12th.
His tour ended at 30 missions. He rotated stateside in January 1945, assigned to training duty at Randolph Field, Texas. The Army wanted him teaching the maneuver to new pilots, but Crawford refused. "I'm not qualified to teach something I only did once," he told the commander. "Get an instructor pilot who's practiced it." So they did. Captain James Holland, a test pilot from Wright Field, flew 40 tail-first landings under controlled conditions. He refined the technique, established safe parameters. Minimum altitude, 500 feet. Maximum wind, 15 knots. Gear position, partially extended, unlocked. Approach speed, 90 knots.
Rate of descent, 300 feet per minute. Holland taught the procedure to 20 instructors. Those instructors taught 300 pilots. By war's end, an estimated 1,500 Allied pilots knew how to execute the Crawford reversal. 7 more successfully used it in combat. 63 lives saved. But the story extended beyond the war. In 1947, civilian aviation authorities studied the technique for commercial applications. Could it work for commercial aircraft? Testing showed promise for specific scenarios, mainly gear malfunction during low visibility approaches. But civilian pilots resisted. Too unconventional. Passengers would panic seeing the aircraft fly sideways. The technique remained military only, a tool for extreme emergencies when conventional options were exhausted. Crawford's crew stayed together through war's end. All 9 men survived. Jennings became a commercial pilot, flying DC-3s across the Midwest. Morrison taught mathematics at UCLA. Delgado opened a garage in Detroit. Kowalski worked construction in Chicago. Liu became a doctor in San Francisco. Henderson taught high school in Georgia. Washington ran a jazz club in Harlem. O'Malley joined the police force in Boston. Sterling wrote novels about the war, changing names and details, but always including the backwards landing. They held reunions every 5 years, always in Montana, at Crawford's ranch near Billings. The last reunion happened in 1993. 6 men attended. Crawford was 81 then, still flying, a Cessna 172 he'd bought in 1968. Jennings asked him if he ever practiced the reversal again, just for old times. Crawford shook his head. Once was enough. Lightning doesn't strike twice. But lightning had struck, 7 times in combat, dozens more in training. The maneuver Crawford improvised in desperation became doctrine. The impossible became procedure. And the pilot who everyone said was insane became the man who saved lives by thinking backwards. The B-17 from November 12th, tail number 42-31407, Rocky Mountain High, never flew again. The landing had stressed the airframe beyond repair. The Army salvaged usable parts and scrapped to the rest. But the nose art was preserved, a painting of mountains with clouds below. It's displayed at the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio. A placard beneath explains the story. Visitors pause, read, and invariably ask the same question. He really landed tail first? Yes, he really did. Crawford died in 2001 at age 89. Heart failure. Quiet, peaceful. The funeral was small. Family, a handful of old friends, 3 surviving crew members. No military honors. He'd refused them. "I was just doing my job," he'd say whenever anyone called him a hero. But his obituary in the Billings Gazette told the truth. It described a pilot who ignored protocol to save his crew, who bet on reverse odds because sometimes the winning move is the one nobody expects, who proved that innovation doesn't require permission, it requires courage. The obituary ended with a quote from Jennings, Crawford's co-pilot. "Tom taught me that rules exist until they don't. When you're out of options, you make new ones. That's not recklessness. That's survival." The Crawford reversal is still taught at military flight schools. Modern aircraft have redundant hydraulic systems, making gear failure rare. But the principle remains. When conventional approaches fail, unconventional solutions save lives.
Pilots learn the physics, practice the maneuver in simulators, and hear the story of a Montana crop duster's son who flew backwards into legend. November 12, 1944, the day laughter became silence. The day 8 condemned men walked away alive. The day one pilot proved that sometimes the impossible is just the probable nobody tried yet. In warfare, survival often depends on thinking differently. Crawford understood this instinctively. His poker strategy, betting reverse odds, reflected his flying philosophy. Everyone expects forward motion, but physics doesn't care about expectations. It cares about forces, angles, and momentum. Crawford manipulated those variables in ways no one anticipated because he wasn't bound by what should work. He focused on what could work. Military innovation frequently emerges from desperation. When standard procedures fail, individuals improvise. Most improvisations fail spectacularly. Crawford succeeded, not because he was lucky, but because he understood his aircraft intimately. He'd flown 800 hours before combat. He knew how the B-17 responded to unconventional inputs. That knowledge, combined with Montana fog experience, gave him the confidence to attempt what others dismissed as suicide. The November 12th landing wasn't Crawford's only contribution to aviation safety. He'd previously suggested modifications to B-17 oxygen systems after noticing crew members struggling with mask connections at high altitude. His recommendation, adding quick-release connectors, was implemented across the 8th Air Force by early 1945. Estimated lives saved from improved oxygen access, unknown but significant. Crawford never sought recognition. His personality mirrored his flying style: quiet, methodical, effective. He avoided publicity, declined interview requests. When aviation historians contacted him in the 1980s for oral history projects, he politely refused. "Talk to my crew," he'd say. "They're the ones who trusted me." But the crew always redirected credit back to Crawford. As Sterling wrote in his 1987 memoir, Fortress Winter, "We lived because Tom didn't panic. Panic makes you follow rules even when rules guarantee death. Tom ignored rules and followed physics. That's the difference between dying and living." The Crawford reversal represents more than emergency procedure. It symbolizes adaptive thinking under pressure. Modern military training emphasizes this principle. When doctrine fails, adapt. The maneuver serves as case study in flight schools, demonstrating how individual initiative can reshape standard practice. By 2000, tail-first landings had saved an estimated 93 lives across multiple air forces. The US, British, Canadian, and Australian militaries all incorporated variations of the technique into emergency procedures. Each adaptation credited Crawford's November 1944 innovation. Crawford's legacy extends beyond aviation. Business schools use his story to illustrate creative problem-solving. The case study title, "Backwards Thinking: Innovation Under Constraints." Students analyze how Crawford's crop dusting experience, poker strategy, and mechanical knowledge combined to produce breakthrough thinking during crisis. His approach, reversing conventional assumptions, applies broadly. When standard solutions fail, examining problems from opposite perspectives often reveals alternatives. Crawford didn't ask, "How do I land normally with damaged gear?" He asked, "How do I minimize impact forces regardless of landing orientation?" That reframing enabled innovation. The 8 men who walked away that November day each carried Crawford's lesson into civilian life. They approached obstacles differently. When conventional paths closed, they looked for alternatives. None became famous, but all succeeded in their chosen fields, crediting their wartime experience, specifically November 12th, with teaching them resilience and adaptive thinking. Jennings, the co-pilot, perhaps expressed it best during a 1995 interview with Aviation History magazine. "Tom showed us that survival isn't about following procedures. It's about understanding principles. Procedures are guidelines. Principles are universal. Master principles, and you can improvise when guidelines fail. That's what kept us alive." The men who flew these missions understood sacrifice in ways most of us never will.
They improvised, adapted, and survived because they refused to accept that the impossible meant certain death. Crawford's legacy lives on not just in emergency procedures, but in the understanding that innovation saves lives. If this story moved you, we'd be deeply grateful if you'd click the like button. Every like helps YouTube recommend these stories to more people who need to hear them. It's how we keep these histories alive and continue bringing you more untold accounts from the war. We'd be honored if you'd subscribe to this channel. These stories deserve to be remembered. They deserve to be told. Hit the notification bell so you never miss another account of courage, ingenuity, and the human spirit under fire. Please tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Your country? Your city? Did you or someone you know serve during World War II? Share your memories below. Every comment helps preserve these stories for future generations. Next time, we'll tell you about the navigator who saved an entire bomber group using nothing but a broken compass and dead reckoning. Until then, thank you for watching. Thank you for remembering. These stories must never be forgotten.